Have you ever wondered why the nicest people often finish last, while those who seem cold and calculated somehow always end up on top? There's a disturbing truth hiding in plain sight that most people will never recognize, and once you see it, you'll never look at human interactions the same way again. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Right now, as you're watching this, your mind is being shaped by forces you don't even realize exist. Society has spent years conditioning you to believe that kindness is strength, that being available makes you valuable, and that explaining yourself shows integrity. But what if I told you that every time you've chosen to be the good person, you've actually been handing over your power to someone who understands the real rules of the game? Has this ever happened to you? You've been the one who always says, yes, always helps out, always tries to keep the peace, only to watch someone else get the promotion, the respect, or the recognition you deserved. You probably told yourself it was just bad luck, or that eventually your goodness would be rewarded. But deep down, you've felt that gnawing suspicion that something fundamental about how the world works has been kept from you. Here's what they don't want you to discover. Your mind has been systematically trained to rot through misguided kindness and unnecessary submission. While you've been learning to be considerate and accommodating, others have been studying the invisible psychology of power dynamics. They've learned that the world doesn't actually reward softness. It studies it, maps it out, and then weaponizes it against the very people who display it. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and it will definitely disturb some deeply held beliefs you have about success and human nature. Every single day, calculated individuals are using principles that were written centuries ago to gain psychological advantages over people just like you. They're not necessarily smarter, more talented, or even more deserving. They simply understand something crucial about how power actually operates in the real world. The most dangerous realization you're about to have is that true power has never come from being everyone's favorite person. It doesn't emerge from constant availability or from explaining your every move. Instead, it grows from strategic silence, disciplined behavior, and moves so calculated that others never see them coming. While you've been trained to think that being understanding makes you strong, others have learned that being unreadable makes you untouchable. What you're witnessing in your own life, that frustrating pattern where decent people get overlooked while seemingly ruthless individuals rise to positions of influence, isn't an accident. It's the predictable result of understanding versus ignorance about how human psychology actually functions when stakes are high and resources are limited. And now, you're about to learn exactly how this invisible game is played. If you want to understand the real psychology behind influence, instead of hoping things work out, hit subscribe. This is what every video explores. The truth is, what I'm about to share with you isn't feel-good motivation or another self-help transformation story. This is preparation for psychological warfare against every single impulse that was programmed into you to keep you manageable, predictable, and ultimately controllable. The people who shaped your early beliefs about kindness and fairness knew exactly what they were doing when they taught you to always be available, always explain yourself, and always put others first. Think about every painful experience you've had where someone took advantage of your good nature. Instead of trying to heal from it or rationalize it away, I want you to start seeing that pain differently. Each moment of betrayal, each time someone walked over you, each instance where your kindness was met with manipulation, that's not just random suffering. That's intelligence data about how human nature actually operates when people think they can get away with it. The most successful individuals you've ever encountered understand something that might disturb you. They've learned to dissect their painful experiences like a Detective analyzes evidence. They don't get emotional about being deceived or mistreated. Instead, they study the patterns, memorize the tactics, and build a psychological database of how people reveal their true intentions when they believe no consequences exist. Now, I want to go even deeper into this hidden reality, starting with perhaps the most counterintuitive principle you'll ever encounter. While everyone else is trying to look strong, impressive, and capable, there's a completely different approach that's been quietly dominating human interactions for centuries. The most dangerous people you'll ever meet are the ones no one sees coming. They don't walk into rooms announcing their capabilities or broadcasting their achievements. They don't need to prove anything to anyone because they understand something profound about human psychology. When someone appears too powerful too quickly, it triggers an instinctive defensive response in others. People start forming alliances against them, studying their weaknesses, plotting ways to bring them down. But when someone seems harmless, maybe even a little uncertain or struggling, something fascinating happens. Guards drop, people start talking freely, secrets get shared. Real intentions become visible. The person who everyone underestimates suddenly has access to information and opportunities that the obviously powerful person could never obtain. This isn't about pretending to be weak or playing victim. This is about understanding that your true strength should never be fully displayed until the moment you choose to use it. Let others assume they have you figured out while you're quietly observing, learning, and positioning yourself for moves they'll never anticipate. Write in the comments, "I see the game now," if this perspective is starting to shift how you view your past interactions with people. When you understand this principle deeply, you'll start recognizing a fascinating pattern that most people completely miss. If you display your capabilities too early, if you let others see your full potential before the right moment, something predictable happens. They begin forming alliances against you. It's almost instinctive. When humans sense someone might outperform them or challenge their position, they unconsciously start building coalitions to contain that threat. But when you allow others to underestimate your capabilities, doors begin opening that would otherwise remain locked forever. People start sharing information they'd never reveal to someone they perceived as competition. They invite you into conversations where real decisions get made, assuming you're not sophisticated enough to capitalize on what you're hearing. They literally hand you the keys to understanding their weaknesses, their fears, and their strategic blind spots. The most profound revelation about human behavior is how differently people treat those they consider beneath them versus those they see as equals or threats. When someone believes you're not playing at their level, their entire demeanor shifts. They become more authentic, less guarded, almost careless with information that could be incredibly valuable if you knew how to use it properly. This dynamic creates an incredible advantage for those who understand it. While everyone else is performing, trying to impress, working hard to be seen and acknowledged, you're operating in a completely different space. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're simply observing, listening, and quietly building a comprehensive understanding of how people actually behave when they think no consequences exist. The transformation that happens when you embrace this approach is remarkable. You stop wasting energy on meaningless displays of competence and start investing that energy into genuine skill development and strategic positioning. You become the person others confide in, not because they trust you, but because they don't fear you. And that lack of fear makes them incredibly sloppy with information that could determine outcomes. Now here's where this gets really interesting, because what I'm about to reveal goes beyond just appearing weaker. There's a whole psychology behind why people become careless around those they underestimate, and once you understand the mechanisms behind this behavior, you'll start seeing opportunities everywhere that were previously invisible to you. Put down, "I understand the advantage," if You're starting to see how this could completely change your approach to challenging situations. The mechanism I just revealed leads us to an even more uncomfortable truth about human psychology, one that most people will actively resist because it challenges everything they've been taught about being a good person. You're about to discover why your instinct to fix things, to make situations fair, to restore balance, might actually be one of your biggest strategic mistakes. Here's what happens in real-world scenarios. You'll find yourself in situations where something appears broken or unfair, but that broken system is actually working in your favor. Maybe it's workplace dysfunction that keeps your competitors distracted while you quietly advance your projects. Maybe it's social chaos that makes you appear more stable and reliable by comparison. Maybe it's a communication breakdown that prevents others from coordinating against your interests. Subscribe if you're ready for strategic, thinking about human behavior rather than surface-level advice. We're just getting started. Society has programmed you to feel guilty about these moments. You've been conditioned to believe that if you don't immediately jump in to fix problems, to restore fairness, to help everyone achieve balance, then you're somehow morally deficient. This programming is incredibly powerful because it taps into your deepest fears about being seen as ruthless or calculating. But here's the hidden truth about how power actually operates in the real world. It doesn't flourish in perfectly fair environments. Power grows specifically in asymmetrical situations where some people have advantages that others don't recognize or can't access. When you rush to fix every imbalance, when you constantly work to level playing fields, you're often dismantling the very conditions that were giving you leverage. The transformation that occurs when you start recognizing these patterns is profound. You begin seeing that some dysfunction isn't accidental chaos that needs your intervention. Sometimes it's beneficial leverage that's keeping you protected, invisible, or advantageously positioned, while others remain confused and distracted. This doesn't make you evil or manipulative. It makes you strategic. When a situation naturally creates conditions where others reveal their true intentions, where competitors waste energy on the wrong priorities, where your genuine capabilities remain hidden until you choose to deploy them, why would you disrupt that advantage just to appear noble? Now, understanding when to maintain beneficial dysfunction requires a completely different way of thinking about conflict and relationships, which brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive approach to dealing with people who challenge you. Write in the comments, "I see the leverage now," if this perspective is starting to change how you view situations you previously felt obligated to fix. The most dangerous mindset shift you can make is recognizing that your mind isn't a rescue mission for other people's problems. It's a fortress designed to protect your interests and advance your position. Every single time you dismantle situations that were quietly working in your favor just to appear noble or fair, you're essentially burning your own throne while others watch and benefit from your misguided generosity. This realization creates a fundamental transformation in how you approach interpersonal dynamics, especially when people try to draw you into conflicts or debates. Most people have never considered that every argument they enter is actually an invitation to expose themselves completely. When someone challenges your perspective or tries to provoke you into defending your position, they're not really interested in reaching mutual understanding. They're gathering intelligence about your thought patterns, your emotional triggers, and most importantly, your desperate need to be proven right. Once someone understands exactly how to provoke you, they essentially own a piece of your mental real estate. They know which buttons to push to make you react predictably, which topics will make you lose your composure, and how to manipulate your need for validation into giving them exactly what they want from you. But here's where the journey takes an unexpected turn. Instead of engaging in these psychological traps, There's a completely different approach that most people never consider because it feels counterintuitive to everything they've learned about standing up for themselves. When you pull back instead of arguing, when you choose isolation over engagement, you're not being weak or avoidant. You're actually deploying one of the most sophisticated psychological weapons available. The hidden truth about human behavior is that when people try to provoke arguments or draw you into debates, what they're really seeking isn't to prove they're right. They're desperately craving your attention, your validation, and most of all, your emotional energy. They want to see you get flustered, to watch you scramble to defend yourself, to witness you losing your composure while trying to convince them of something they never intended to accept anyway. Now, when you understand the psychology behind why isolation becomes such a powerful response to these provocations, you'll start recognizing opportunities to maintain control in situations where you previously felt compelled to defend yourself. Write in the comments, "I control my energy now," if you're ready to stop giving away your mental resources to people who don't deserve access to your inner world. The psychological transformation that happens when you embrace this approach reveals something profound about human behavior. While everyone else is scrambling to be heard, to prove their points, to win debates they were never meant to win, you're operating in a completely different dimension. You become the observer, the one who studies tone, patterns, and all those unspoken communications that most people miss because they're too busy preparing their next argument. There's something almost unsettling about watching this dynamic play out in real time. The most psychologically dominant individuals throughout history weren't the loud ones demanding attention. They were calm, calculating, and eerily composed, simply watching as others destroyed their own credibility while desperately begging for responses that never came. They understood that silence isn't empty space waiting to be filled with words. It's a pressure that forces others to reveal more than they ever intended. This brings us to a revelation that might completely change how you think about relationships, whether personal or professional. The harsh truth is that people don't actually value what's always available to them. When you're constantly present, always responsive, consistently offering your energy and attention, something predictable happens in their minds. You become background noise. Your presence gets normalized to the point where you essentially disappear into the fabric of their daily routine. The journey from being someone who's always available to someone who's strategically absent represents one of the most dramatic mindset shifts you can experience. Most people operate under the false belief that showing up constantly creates stronger connections and deeper appreciation. But human psychology works in the exact opposite direction. The more freely you give your time, attention, and energy, the less valuable it becomes in other people's perception. Think about your own experiences with this principle. The people who command the most respect in your life probably aren't the ones who are always available for every conversation, every favor, every emergency. They're likely the ones whose presence feels special because it's not guaranteed, whose attention carries weight because it's not easily obtained, whose approval matters because it's genuinely earned rather than freely distributed. Now, understanding this psychology opens up an entirely different approach to building influence and commanding respect, one that requires you to completely rethink what it means to be valuable in other people's lives. Write in the comments, "My presence is valuable," if you're starting to see how scarcity could transform the way people perceive and treat you. When you strategically remove yourself from situations, you're not retreating or giving up control. You're consolidating power in the most sophisticated way possible by removing your light from their environment and forcing them to confront just how dependent they've become on your presence. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about understanding that your energy has been flowing freely in directions that don't serve your interests. And it's time to redirect that flow. The psychology behind this approach taps into something fundamental about how the human mind processes value. We don't naturally appreciate what's always available to us. Instead, we develop deep attachments to what we fear losing. When you remove yourself strategically, you interrupt the patterns people have built around expecting your availability. Suddenly, your presence transforms from something they took for granted into something they realize is a privilege, not an automatic right. This transformation creates what I call the vacuum effect, and once you understand how it works, you'll never see relationships the same way again. Your absence literally carves your shape into their environment. People start feeling smaller, less confident, somehow incomplete without your presence anchoring their experience. They begin questioning themselves, wondering what they did wrong, analyzing their last interactions with you for clues about why you've become less available. The beauty of this approach is that you achieve profound influence without saying a single word. Your silence becomes more powerful than any argument you could have made. Your withdrawal communicates more effectively than any explanation you could have offered. People start respecting your boundaries not because you demanded it, but because they're suddenly afraid of losing access to something they didn't realize they valued until it was no longer guaranteed. This dynamic shift happens across all areas of life. In professional settings, colleagues who once treated your contributions casually suddenly pay closer attention when you're not always the first to volunteer. In personal relationships, friends who took your support for granted begin reaching out more thoughtfully when they realize you're no longer automatically available for every crisis or casual conversation. Now, this principle of strategic withdrawal connects directly to how you should handle the rewards and consequences you offer to others, because the timing and predictability of your responses shapes how people behave around you in ways most people never consider. Write in the comments, "I understand my worth now," if you're ready to stop being taken for granted and start being genuinely appreciated for the value you bring. The psychology behind how you distribute rewards and consequences shapes every relationship you have, yet most people approach this completely backwards. When your praise, recognition, or approval becomes predictable, it loses all psychological impact on the people receiving it. They start taking it for granted, expecting it as their due, rather than seeing it as something earned. The same principle applies to how you handle disappointment or disrespect. When you delay consequences or telegraph your punishments in advance, you drain them of their power to actually modify behavior. This represents a fundamental transformation in how you think about influence and behavior modification. Instead of giving recognition immediately when someone does something you appreciate, you learn to reward slowly and strategically. This approach forces people to chase your approval rather than assuming they already have it. When your praise becomes rare and genuinely earned, it carries exponentially more weight in shaping how people behave around you. The journey from being someone who gives constant positive feedback to someone whose approval must be genuinely earned creates a dramatic shift in your relationships. People start working harder to impress you, not because you're withholding kindness, but because they recognize that your recognition actually means something. Their consistency becomes authentic rather than performed, because they understand that casual efforts won't earn your acknowledgement. But here's where this principle becomes truly powerful. When someone crosses your boundaries or disrespects your time, you don't announce your displeasure or threaten consequences. You simply disappear. You withdraw your energy, attention, and presence without explanation or warning. This creates something far more impactful than any argument or confrontation could achieve. Silent punishment forces people to sit in uncertainty, wondering what went wrong, analyzing their recent behavior, questioning whether they've lost your respect. This psychological discomfort motivates genuine change in ways that direct confrontation rarely accomplishes. They're not defending themselves against accusations or arguing about fairness. They're confronting the possibility that their actions have consequences they didn't anticipate. Now, mastering this approach to rewards and consequences connects directly to perhaps the most sophisticated principle of psychological influence, which involves understanding exactly how much information you should reveal about your true thoughts and intentions. Write in the comments, "I control my responses now," if you're ready to make your approval something that actually has to be earned rather than assumed. When you master this silent approach to consequences, you create something far more powerful than fear of punishment. You create psychological paranoia. People won't just worry about doing something obviously wrong. They'll start fearing that they don't understand what constitutes wrong behavior in your eyes. This uncertainty keeps them constantly self-monitoring, second-guessing their actions, trying to decode your approval or disapproval from subtle signals that may or may not even exist. This transformation in how people relate to you opens up an entirely different level of psychological influence, one that most people never discover because they're too busy oversharing and over-explaining themselves. The hidden truth about communication is that every single word you say gives others threads to pull on. Every opinion you express, every emotion you reveal, every plan you discuss becomes potential fuel for strategic manipulation if someone decides they want to use it against you. Think about your own conversations and how much information you typically volunteer without even realizing it. When someone asks how you're feeling, you probably give them a detailed emotional landscape. When they inquire about your plans, you likely share timelines, motivations, and concerns. When they challenge your perspective, you probably defend it with personal examples that reveal your triggers and insecurities. The journey toward understanding this principle requires recognizing that most people are completely unable to handle silence in conversations. They'll fill empty spaces with clues, nervous confessions, and accidental admissions while you remain still and observant. What you discover when you stop talking and start listening is remarkable. People will literally tell you their weaknesses, their fears, their strategies, and their genuine intentions if you just create enough psychological space for them to fill. This isn't about being cold or disconnected. It's about understanding that information asymmetry creates power asymmetry. When you know significantly more about someone than they know about you, you can predict their behavior, anticipate their moves, and position yourself advantageously in ways they'll never see coming. Now, this principle of strategic information control becomes even more powerful when you understand how to shape the very framework within which people interpret your actions and decisions. Write in the comments, "My silence is my strength," if you're ready to stop giving away valuable intelligence about your thoughts, plans, and vulnerabilities to people who haven't earned that access. When you do choose to speak, the transformation in how you communicate becomes immediately apparent to everyone around you. Your words become short, purposeful, and strategically deployed. You're no longer talking to create emotional connections or to be understood on a deeper level. Every sentence serves a specific function: to direct outcomes, to control situations, to guide conversations toward conclusions that benefit your position. This shift in communication style reveals something most people never consider about the relationship between clarity and power. We've been conditioned to believe that being clear, detailed, and transparent always represents strength and integrity. But in the real world of psychological dynamics, ambiguity often represents the highest form of control over other people's actions and decisions. When you remain deliberately vague about your intentions, your timeline, your true feelings about situations, you force others to operate based on assumptions rather than certainties. They start making decisions designed to please what they think you want, rather than challenging what they know you want. This uncertainty keeps them mentally occupied, constantly trying to decode your actual position while you maintain complete flexibility in how you respond to changing circumstances. The journey toward becoming truly unreadable creates a fascinating dynamic with people who are accustomed to manipulating others through emotional baiting or psychological pressure tactics. When they encounter someone who reveals nothing, who doesn't react predictably, who remains mysteriously composed regardless of provocation, they become restless and increasingly sloppy in their approach. These individuals are used to reading people's emotional landscapes, identifying triggers, and exploiting vulnerabilities that people inadvertently reveal through their reactions. But when you provide no emotional data for them to analyze, no predictable responses for them to exploit, they start overreaching. They reveal more about their own strategies, their own desperation for control, their own psychological dependencies on being able to manipulate others. This creates an incredible advantage because while they're burning through their tactics trying to get a reaction from you, you're calmly observing their methods, understanding their patterns, and building a comprehensive profile of exactly how they operate when they think they're in control. Now, this principle of strategic ambiguity connects directly to perhaps the most fundamental concept of psychological influence, which involves understanding who really controls the context in which all these interactions take place. Write in the comments, "I am unreadable now," if you're ready to become someone whose true thoughts and intentions remain completely mysterious to those around you. Understanding who controls the context of any interaction represents perhaps the most fundamental principle of psychological influence. The first person to define what's happening in any situation almost always wins, because once that frame gets established, everyone else unconsciously adjusts their behavior to fit within those predetermined boundaries. Most people never realize they're operating inside frameworks that were deliberately constructed by someone else to serve that person's interests. This revelation about how perception operates as a lever of power changes everything about how you approach challenging situations. When you control how people perceive what's happening, you don't need to control them directly through force or manipulation. They'll naturally limit their own options and responses to fit within the framework you've established. They'll police themselves according to rules they didn't even realize were imposed on them. The transformation that occurs when you start recognizing this dynamic in real time is profound. You begin seeing that most conflicts, negotiations, and social interactions are won or lost before anyone even speaks. The person who successfully frames the situation as a certain type of encounter with certain implicit rules and expectations has already determined the probable outcomes. Powerful individuals understand this so deeply that they build the entire room before entering it. They decide the tempo of the interaction, the tone that will dominate the conversation, and the boundaries within which the discussion will take place. They're not reacting to circumstances as they unfold. They're creating the circumstances that force others to react within predetermined parameters. This goes far beyond simply being prepared or confident. It's about understanding that every human interaction exists within some kind of frame, and if you don't deliberately construct that frame to serve your interests, someone else will construct it to serve theirs. The person who sets the emotional temperature, who establishes what constitutes reasonable behavior, who defines what success or failure looks like in that particular context, has already won the most important battle. The journey toward mastering this principle requires developing an almost unconscious awareness of how frames get established and how they can be shifted when necessary. You start entering situations not as someone who hopes for favorable outcomes, but as someone who creates the conditions that make favorable outcomes inevitable. Now, this ability to control contextual frameworks connects directly to the final principle that determines whether you'll spend your life chasing opportunities or creating them. Write in the comments, "I set the terms now," if you're ready to stop operating within other people's frameworks and start building your own. The mastery of this principle becomes most apparent when someone tries to trap you within a negative framework. Instead of defending yourself within their established boundaries, you learn to redefine the entire situation. You don't argue about whether their accusation is fair or unfair. You challenge the premise that their framework deserves any consideration at all. When someone says you're being distant, you don't explain why you're not distant. You reframe distance as selective engagement with people who demonstrate they deserve your time. This approach represents a complete transformation in how you think about access and influence. Most people spend their entire lives begging for access to opportunities, relationships, and positions of power. They network desperately, trying to impress the right people, hoping to be invited into rooms where important decisions get made. But every moment you spend chasing access, you're admitting that real power belongs to someone else. The journey toward becoming someone others seek access to requires a fundamental mindset shift about value creation. Instead of trying to prove your worth to people who may or may not recognize it, you focus on building psychological, intellectual, and emotional capital so quietly and consistently that your absence becomes a problem others need to solve. You stop measuring your success by who accepts you and start measuring it by who needs you. This transformation happens through strategic withdrawal from the attention economy that most people are trapped within. While others are constantly broadcasting their achievements, explaining their value, and competing for recognition, you're building something more substantial in the background. You're developing skills that can't be easily replicated, insights that others depend on, and a psychological presence that creates stability in environments where you're involved. The hidden truth about influence is that people don't respect what they can easily access or what constantly seeks their approval. They respect what seems complete without their validation, what operates according to its own standards, what offers value on its own terms, rather than desperately trying to meet their expectations. Now, understanding this principle completely changes how you approach the inevitable challenge of detaching from people and situations that no longer serve your development. Which brings us to perhaps the most difficult but necessary decision you'll ever have to make. Write in the comments, "I am the access now," if you're ready to stop chasing opportunities and start creating the conditions that make opportunities chase you. This transformation from seeking opportunities to creating gravitational pull represents one of the most dramatic shifts you can experience in your personal development journey. Instead of networking desperately for relevance, you focus on creating something so precise, so valuable, so psychologically compelling that others naturally start circling around you. They don't approach you out of pity or courtesy. They seek you out of genuine need because you've built something they can't easily replicate or replace. The person who controls access becomes the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper holds the ultimate form of leverage in any relationship dynamic. When you can genuinely say no to opportunities that don't serve your interests, when you can walk away from situations that demand more than they offer, you've achieved something most people never experience. You've become someone whose time and energy are genuinely scarce resources rather than freely distributed commodities. But here's where this journey takes its most challenging turn. To maintain this position of influence, you have to make decisions that will feel uncomfortable, even painful at first. You don't evolve by staying connected to people who were built for your previous self. The friends who knew you when you were uncertain, desperate for approval, constantly available for every crisis. The colleagues who remember when you said yes to everything and explained yourself constantly. These connections, no matter how nostalgic they feel, represent anchors to a version of yourself you're trying to transcend. Growth demands strategic isolation from people who can't adjust to your transformation, who keep trying to pull you back into old patterns, who make you feel guilty for setting boundaries they never had to respect before. This isn't about being cruel or ungrateful. It's about recognizing that some relationships were built around your weaknesses and they can't survive your strengths. The most profound realization comes when you understand that burning these bridges isn't just helpful for your development. It's absolutely necessary. When there's no comfortable path back to who you used to be, your mind sharpens in ways that surprise you. Your focus narrows, your decision-making becomes clearer. You stop second-guessing yourself because retreat is no longer an option you've left available. The transformation you experience when you fully embrace these principles will be unlike anything you've encountered before. You'll find yourself operating in a psychological landscape that most people can't even comprehend, let alone navigate successfully. The way you handle conflict, the way you build relationships, the way you approach opportunities, everything shifts when you understand that power isn't something you chase. It's something you cultivate through strategic thinking and disciplined behavior. If you've made it this far, you're already demonstrating something important about your mindset. You're not looking for quick fixes or surface-level advice. You want to understand how influence actually works, how psychology operates behind the scenes, how to build genuine leverage in a world that rewards the calculated over the kind. That's exactly the kind of thinking I explore in every video on this channel, the hidden dynamics that shape success, the uncomfortable truths about human nature, the strategic principles that separate those who get what they want from those who hope someone else will give it to them. If this perspective resonates with you, subscribe because this is just the beginning of what we'll uncover together. And if you recognize yourself in this journey we've been on today, if you see how these principles could transform your approach to every challenging situation you face, hit that like button. It tells me you understand that real power comes from understanding psychology, not from hoping the world will be fair to people who deserve better. Leave me a comment saying, "This message was meant for me," if you made it to the end and you're ready to start thinking like someone who controls outcomes instead of hoping for them. There's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper, exploring how to read people's true intentions before they even realize what they're revealing about themselves. Click and continue with me over there, because once you start seeing these patterns, you'll never want to go back to operating blind to how influence really works.